Everybody. My name is Rob Gross, and I'm the director of UKERC, the UK Energy Research Centre. I think the webinar's gone live. I hope it has. I hope that people out there can hear me. We are going to be talking about UKERC's annual review of energy policy. This is a publication that we've been producing for a few years now, which reflects back on the year from an energy perspective, in order to reflect forward and think about the challenges that lie ahead of us in the coming year. The way that we're going to run the event is that we have a number of presentations from some of my co-directors, my fellow researchers across different universities that form part of the UKERC consortium. We're not going to try and cover all of the topics that the review spans. Rather, we've picked a few that we think will be interesting. All of this suddenly got very much more contemporary. In fact, it couldn't really be more contemporary, because this morning, BEIS, the government department responsible for energy policy, launched a white paper, a long delayed, much anticipated white paper on energy policy, with many provisions that are relevant to the things that we're talking about in this afternoon's event. So I've invited along a couple of the other authors. Although they're not going to be speaking to their sections of the report this morning, they're available to take questions from the floor, which might be about the energy white paper, or of course anything else that's in this conversation, because there's so much going on in the energy and climate change space, with the 6th carbon budget from the Committee on Climate Change just last week. As I've said, hot on the heels of that, we've got an energy white paper. Over the weekend, of course, the United Nations negotiations were taking place. We've got all sorts of provisions to do with decarbonisation of transport, further consultations around the electricity supply industry, proposals to do things with industry and hydrogen and heat pumps, and the list goes on and on and on. And we're also looking forward to the UK co-hosting the climate change negotiations towards the end of next year. So we've picked out a few key topics that we're going to talk to you about this morning. First up, I've got my colleague from Oxford University, Christian Brand, and Christian will be talking about some of our what we put into the review regarding mobility and transport, and in particular cars. We then hand over to Faye Wade, and Faye is going to be talking about, well, green jobs, which obviously has received a lot of attention in the kind of post-COVID conversation, but in particular the skills, and perhaps the skills gap that we might be looking to as we look ahead to the future and kind of post-COVID recovery. I should say that all of the focus of the energy policy review, the annual review this year, was around lessons from the past year. It would have been really strange for UKERC to have produced an energy policy review without making a very significant focus on COVID. But of course, both COVID and net zero combined mean that we really are in quite unprecedented times. I'm also joined just in time, by the skin of her teeth, by Caroline Kuzemko from Warwick University, who will be talking about Brexit. So as if we didn't have enough to talk about with net zero targets, energy white papers, 6th carbon budgets, COVID, and everything else, we've also got 18 days left before we bump out of the European Union in some way or another, either with some sort of very slim deal or no deal. Okay, so just to do a bit of housekeeping now, we're running through to 1 o'clock this afternoon. The running order for the speakers is going to be Christian, then Faye, then Caroline. We're then going to go to open Q&A from our audience. There is a Q&A box which you should see along the toolbar towards, well, at least on my version of Zoom, it's along the bottom of my screen. That might, I guess, depend on how you have the gallery set up. and we'll be taking questions. I'll be chairing the questions, and we'll take them more or less in the order that they arise. We won't be taking questions during the presentations, so please hold off at least towards the end of Caroline's presentations before you ask them. And just to say, as I've mentioned earlier, we're also joined by Professors Keith Bell and Jason Chilvers. Keith is at Strathclyde and covers the electricity system, electrical engineering, and all things related to that. Jason Chilvers is at UEA and heads up our observatory on societal engagement. So there's a whole bunch of things around citizens' assemblies and so on that are also relevant. I have gone on for long enough. I'm now going to hand over to Christian to share his slides. And I think the plan is that I and my co-presenters will be off camera during the slides. We've got 5 or 6 minutes per person, and I will be reminding you of that if you go over. Thanks, Christian. Over to you.
Thanks, Rob. Just to double check if everybody's seeing this. So first slide. So we're going to talk. Excellent, fantastic. So this year, in this year's review, we look again at decarbonisation in the passenger car transport sector, and explain a little bit why in a minute. So you probably have heard about, in the 10-point plan a couple of weeks ago, we had that ban on new petrol and diesel cars brought forward from 2040 to 2030, which should be hailed as good news, really. And UKERC has been doing a little bit sort of analysis and research in the background over the years, and has been pushing for that sort of date, which brings it in line with other countries. It's not world leading, others like Sweden are a little bit more advanced there. But so and as part of this good news also, I would say, is there's an increasing sort of investment in the infrastructure supporting this whole thing. You don't just have the vehicles, of course, you also have the recharging infrastructure. And here, that little picture that bottom left is sort of what the UK government thought was the world's first dedicated EV charging forecourt in Essex from GridServe, but I think you might find there's some already over in China and other countries. So this is the good news, but this solution might also be the problem, because, hang on, I can't see my own stuff at the moment. Yeah, okay, here we are. Because we have had this increase in the car size over the years, and in particular by this shift from hatchbacks and other sort of more traditional car shapes, really, to larger and heavier sports utility vehicles, SUVs. Battery electric vehicles have also gone up to now 1.6% in 2019, and this year is probably going to be around 5 to 6%. So there's definitely a shift going on, but at the same time, you have to sort of increase the car size. So, and this is still about 17 times for every electric vehicle sold, you sell about 17 SUVs. So that's a problem, and that is reflected then in this average new car CO2 emissions are increasing over the time, which one could argue is a failure of the market regulation behind this, which is supposed to bring this down to 95 grams of CO2 per kilometer. But at the moment, we are at 130. So there's a huge gap there. So we have to do something about the new car market. And as I explain in a minute, also about the used cars and the existing stock. So the first thing I wanted to mention here is the key recommendation in this review this year around is that we need to do something in the next 10 years. So this sort of next 10 years is really crucial. The science basically says this. So we need to do something, and transport has been the problem child there. To focus your attention on 2030 and beyond is just not good enough. We propose this sort of more gradual market transformation approach, which hang on, I'm trying to actually see my own slides. That's the problem with Zoom, isn't it? And we've modeled this in a number of ways here. So the market transformation is essentially where you try to phase in this phase out, which is 2030, right, over the next 10 years. And the key result that we had there was, out of this modeling exercise, we could save about 100 million tons of CO2 by 2050. This is sort of cumulative, which is so sizable. It's about 1.5, 1.6 times your annual CO2 from cars at the moment. There's various options how to achieve this. I mean, you can have a zero emission vehicle mandate, or you have an increase, really a drastic increase in the purchase tax of cars, really at the high emitting end. And this sort of chart on the right, at the right bottom corner there, is sort of the percentage of cars sold and owned at the moment, you have the total fleet and new cars by CO2 emission band. And you really target in the next few years, up to maybe 2025, you target the top end, the right tail end here of the market to bring this down. It's a classic sort of market transformation approach, has been done in many, many other product categories before. The second point I wanted to mention is COVID has really brought car sales down by about 30%, we expect now for 2020, which means, because the total fleet is still about the same, that we have a prolonged presence of older polluting cars and a slower turnover to the EVs. So there's a potential problem there a little bit about how we're going to go about over the next 10 years of how to basically doing a technology substitution. There's also that car use has substitute public transport journeys, and I could show you a slide that's really, really quite distressing, because even after now, I think the second lockdown, with car use, we're about at 85–90% of traffic by public transport use in terms of trips that people actually take, not the vehicles on the road or the trains on the railways. It's gone down to 30–40% of the same sort of week in 2019. So it's a bit of an issue there. There's increasing car ownership, so people have been adding second older cars to the existing family runaround. There's also some social research coming out where people are being asked, basically, what are you going to do after lockdown, or after we know a little bit about the effects of when the vaccine arrives early next year. 15% of workers expect to use their car more to drive after lockdown, and that's a little bit of an issue there, of course. We did some scenario analysis around this, and what does it mean if older cars are on and vehicle park a bit longer? And it could happen that by 2025 we have about 1 million more diesels on the road, followed by sort of an increased uptake then of ULEVs when a sort of pent-up demand is then met, and hopefully by that time sort of ULEVs, I have to explain this, ultra-low emission vehicles, basically battery electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, and plug-in hybrids. So anything with a plug and able to go electric. In terms of CO2, that 1 million more diesels and slow turnover would add 4 million tons of CO2. It's not a huge problem, especially long term, that will actually decrease. So key recommendations coming out of this review: we do need to accelerate this transformation, because the next 10 years are really important. And we can do this by phasing in the phase out of the sale of the most polluting vehicles immediately. As I mentioned, this is usually done with a market transformation approach, taxing vehicle ownership and or zero emission vehicle mandates or standards. But we went down the taxation route, because that system's already there. You just basically increase the first year vehicle excise duty as a purchase tax. Something I haven't mentioned before, but this is very important. If you ask me what's the one thing you would do in transport to accelerate transition, is really to price transport in the right way. And we do have to do this with some road user charging, and that's for a number of reasons. It would fill a revenue gap. With increased EV usage, you have lower income from fuel duty. It also would avoid a rebound that people expect with cheaper driving. People drive more. That sort of the case of research would suggest that. It also is an opportunity to do shift modes, and not just over space, but also over time. So it's sort of a lot shifting there a little bit during a typical day, where you have a couple of peaks at for commuting and other travel patterns. But even though 100% uptake of EVs is desirable, we still have to reduce traffic on top of that, and it really depends on what happens with the market. If you do that late, then you have to reduce traffic earlier and more drastically on top of that. And finally, the final point is really, energy divide paper. We're also expecting the decarbonizing transport plan, so this is something to look out for that really has a lot to deliver. But we need some clarity and consistency of strategy because the numbers at the moment really don't add up. I'm not just sort of mentioned the sort of role building program and HS2 even. These are not consistent with decarbonisation transport. And I leave it there. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Christian. Thanks very much indeed. Good. I was just about to ask you to stop sharing. And I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Faye Wade, who is from the University of Edinburgh. And over to you for your slides, Faye. Thanks very much. You're muted, by the way. You're still muted, Faye.
Hello, sorry.
Well done.
Completely lost my Zoom screen at the inopportune moment there.
Okay, very good. We can hear you and see your slides. Thanks very much.
Excellent, thank you, Rob. So in this presentation, I'm going to explore the potential for jobs in energy efficiency and heat decarbonisation, and how those working in the built environment are crucial for delivering net zero climate goals. I'm also going to identify some of the challenges that we need to address in order to actually get there. So, opportunities in energy efficiency. The UK has one of the oldest and most poorly insulated and drafty housing stocks in Europe. Improving the energy efficiency of homes and decarbonising heat is essential for reducing fuel poverty and meeting net zero climate targets. So encouraging activity in this sector is also a way to generate jobs which are distributed across the country and can support the economic recovery from COVID-19. So data from the Office for National Statistics shows that energy efficiency products and services, including lighting, currently comprise around 150,000 jobs in the UK. So I'm referring to the top group of 3 bars on the slide there, which represent 2014, 2016 and 2018. Future projections for England estimate that by 2030, roughly 160,000 jobs will be in low carbon heat, with another 145,000 in energy efficiency products like lighting and control systems. So boosting jobs in the energy efficiency and heat decarbonisation sectors is crucial for meeting climate targets and providing employment following COVID-19. So if we get this right, and these groups are adequately trained and able to share and disseminate energy efficiency information, then they could be an incredibly powerful tool in delivering energy efficiency and heat decarbonisation at the scale needed. But what do we know about building professionals? So they're numerous and diverse. They include architects, tradespeople, large and small organisations, and they also span the public and private sector. They're trusted messengers. So people tend to follow the advice of architects, engineers, and tradespeople. For example, in determining what heating settings to use, what type of windows to install, or how to develop a loft conversion. Some of these people visit homes on a daily basis. So many tradespeople enter people's homes every day. Other building professionals learn about their clients' homes through consultation. They also understand their clients' lifestyles. So for example, how many people are in the household, their working patterns, their leisure activities. And finally, they communicate with one another. So they attend training courses. They are members of representative bodies like GasSafe or the Federation of Master Builders. And through all of those things, this is an incredibly powerful workforce if we have them conveying the right messages in terms of energy efficiency and renewable energy, then they have the capacity to get this out to a huge amount of people. UKERC's fresh review of evidence for job creation from policies supporting energy efficiency and renewable energy is particularly welcome. So this will update research from 2014, which examined how such policies lead to net job creation. And also noted that there are often more jobs available in sectors like domestic retrofitting than existing employment in sectors like oil and gas. So that review is going to be really welcome in terms of further emphasising how important this group is. However, there's work to do. So there's a few challenges here, in particular skills gaps. So we're missing expertise in necessary areas. One key near-term skills gap identified in the report, for example, is that between 2020 and 2025, we're lacking people to fill the space of the design, specification and installation of heat pumps. In addition, energy retrofitting is complex. So to actually deliver energy efficiency, a whole house approach will be required. However, under the UK's current vocational qualification systems, trainees are siloed early into specific skills and training lacks elements of general energy literacy. So we need to broaden that current training provision. There's a lack of trust. So inconsistent government support for energy retrofitting, for example, the early cancellation of the Green Deal programme, has diminished trust. This means that tradespeople are reluctant to engage in schemes. So it's been reported that only 1,174 installers have signed up to the Green Homes grant since its launch in September, while more than 36,000 households have applied for grants. So there's a huge gap there in terms of actual engagement from the repair, maintenance and improvement sector in government programmes. This is particularly important with regard to the Green Homes grant, which the Treasury estimated could create over 100,000 jobs. So there's a long way to go to actually get there, particularly given that we've got maybe 2 years, I think, 3 years on that grant. So a lot of work to do. And then the final point I've noted there, cumbersome accreditation programs. So registration with current programs is often prohibitively expensive and time consuming for many tradespeople, especially sole traders who lose several days of income to attend necessary courses. So there's a lot of work to do there to streamline the engagement of tradespeople in these different programs and getting them accredited to deliver this work. So the Green Jobs Task Force that the government recently announced is very welcome, but a big question there is, will it be enough? And that's maybe something for us to discuss as we go on with the session. I'll stop sharing my screen now. Thanks very much.
Sorry, I missed the Zoom buttons myself there, Faye. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting stuff. And thanks for being so succinct. I'm now handing over to Caroline Kuzemko, who's going to be talking about the dreaded B word. Caroline.
Yeah, I'm just pressing share and hopefully it'll come up any second now.
Yeah, it looks like it is. I can hear you as well.
Good, good. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the dreaded B word. I must have been very bad in a previous life to be researching climate change and Brexit. But anyway, so the section of the policy brief on Brexit is called Running Out of Time at a Crucial Moment. And what it does is it refers to our work, which is ongoing, and actually we're pretty much at the sort of start end of it at the moment. And our work is on trying to figure out what the implications of Brexit are going to be for the politics of net zero energy. So it was going to be implications of Brexit for net zero energy policy, but then we kind of decided that actually net zero energy policy doesn't really yet exist. So this is more about sort of the broader political context within which energy policy making takes place. So when we look at Brexit, we don't think of it as something that just ends at the end of the transition period. We see it as something that is very much ongoing, very much long term, and therefore the implications of it are likely also to not fully be felt for some time to come, particularly, as will come on in a couple of slides' time, the economic implications of it. And what we also note about Brexit is that actually doing Brexit, this process of increasing sovereignty via taking back control, in effect involves quite high levels of political work, and therefore it needs political capacity. Now, when we're thinking about the context, as I've alluded to already, for net zero energy in the UK, we very much come across this notion of the policy gap, something that the Committee on Climate Change have been talking about quite a lot in relation to both the sixth carbon budget, but also to longer term 2050 targets. And this morning it's been announced as part of the announcement of the white paper that the UK wants to be overwhelmingly decarbonised in energy by 2030. And to do that, the inference is also, of course, with the overriding idea of time running out, that quite a lot remains still to be done. So again, a lot more political work is needed. And in particular, I would also note, and this is another thing that comes up in the Committee on Climate Change's work, is the need for a just transition that also includes citizens, engages them, but also has their buy-in. So this is the backdrop to our work. Now, I've got two slides now. One is on the more direct implications for energy of Brexit. Obviously, Brexit is not about energy per se, but there are, of course, some direct implications. Now, clearly, we still don't know with 18 days to go whether there will be a deal or no deal, but we know that if there is a deal, it will be a rather narrow deal. So we know that the UK will be leaving the EU emissions trading system and will therefore have to come up with another way of putting a price on carbon. And we know that the UK will be leaving the internal energy market. And as of this morning, we found out that there will be a UK emissions trading system. Interestingly, there will be a cap on emissions reduced by 5% from day one of trading. And there is an intention to leave it open to linking with international markets, but no specification about which market it wants to link to. And clearly it seems unlikely that that will be happening as of day one of being outside of the EU. And there's also a very interesting section there on saying that it's going to be the first cap and trade system which is a net zero market. But then in the small print, it says that they are going to still consult on how to align the UK ETS with net zero. So although there's more certainty about what emissions trading might look like at the start of the UK being outside of the EU, there's still a fair amount of uncertainty as to how effective that's going to be. The new trading rules outside the IEM are as of yet unclear, but most of the research there seems to indicate that that would place an upward pressure on energy costs. And then I also note the new Office for Environmental Protection, which again is not yet up and running, but has been mooted as a new institution to replace benefits of being part of the EU. And that is due to take responsibility for climate change. So how that's going to work in relation to the Committee on Climate Change or work that ongoing on sustainable energy at BEIS, again, is yet to be seen. So this is the last slide, indirect implications. So of course, it's really important as part of our mapping work to look at what benefits the UK needs to replicate after leaving the EU. These are sort of broader implications that I think are just as important. So firstly, clearly the estimates that the result of Brexit will be a lowering of GDP, by certain amounts, 5% or so over 15 years, according to the OBR, of a narrow deal, and much bigger hit, obviously, as a result of no deal. And what's important to me there is the degree to which that impacts on the amount of money that government has to spend on its important social projects, obviously zero carbon energy being one of those. So the inference being with lower Treasury receipts, more competition for government funding. Secondly, I just want to come back to this really important question of policy capacity, because what we have seen is that the actual process of doing Brexit has taken up a lot of political space, and there have been delays to key net zero policies. Clearly what was announced this morning is something that we've all been waiting for quite some time. And there's some fear that those kinds of delays may continue on over the next year or so. And then I do also want to just note that there is a really interesting question around taking back control and the degree to which UK politics will now be more influential over the shape of these new institutions that are being created and the new ones that need to be created. What powers will they be given? How much capacity will they have? How effective? will they be in practice? For example, the new UK ETS system. And I do note when we're thinking about the shape of these new bodies is that if you look at the paper behind the OEP, the Office for Environmental Protection, it talks about more voluntarism and less legalistic approaches to environmental regulation in the UK. And I note from this morning's announcement this focus on boosting competition being at the centre of what's going to create more affordability for energy in the UK, rather than a refocused and broadened out emphasis on energy efficiency, which many people have been looking for. So on a maybe slightly more positive note, I'll just end by saying that the fact that the UK is creating new regimes and institutions around sustainable energy, this is the moment to be talking to government as much as possible in terms of shaping those institutions, as the decisions today obviously continue to shape the path to net zero. And I'll leave it there.
That's excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Caroline. Very good. And could I ask now all of our speakers and also fellow authors Keith and Jason, if you can show yourselves. There we go. And we're opening up now to Q&A, and I've already got quite a large number of questions beginning to come through. I should say that we had Keith as understudy for Caroline because we're a bit worried that she wasn't on the call. So we also have some slides from Keith that we'll put round subsequent to the meeting, and I'll also ask Keith to make some comments that relate to the electricity sector and what the white paper in particular means for that. I should say that the coverage within the review includes Keith's comments on very many quite wide-ranging electricity sector related things, including the impact of COVID, but also the new network regulation, incentives for investment in renewables and other things. And Jason is I think looking beyond the Citizens' Assembly is the title of his piece. So it's a kind of societal engagement conversation piece. Right, I'm going to go to the questions. I've got my first one is from somebody confusingly using a pseudonym of his wife's PC. So it's from James Sherwood. And James asks, could the participants give their views on the role of community energy in the white paper and beyond? Might see whether Faye would like to have a go at that one.
Yeah, so when I read that question, my immediate thought was around the value of local networks. So I think that community energy has a crucial role to play, and in particular thinking about some of the skills and supply chains that I was talking about. A lot of that work happens based on individual trust. It's around networks that people build, and if you have that in place, then you can get through those energy efficiency messages. You can encourage people to be fitting different types of product in their homes. And I think that also thinking at the community level allows you to do planning for integrated heating and energy efficiency. So looking at things like district heating in certain areas, suitability of that versus heat pumps in different regions, and planning for that, having that clear and consistent messaging early in those local regions, and then building from there.
Okay, Faye, thanks very much. Does anybody else want to come in on the community energy side of things? If you do, just wave at me. Nobody's waving at me, so I assume that's a no. I've got a question from Faye. You're in the firing line for a few of these. I've got a question from Phil Selwood asking about the kind of inherent conservatism of the building professionals and the building trade in general, and how do we ensure that does not become a major obstacle to energy efficiency development?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. I think that conservatism is really interesting. It's one of the ways that tradespeople often get characterized. I think that there is an extent to which they are conservative in their choices. They use things that they trust and know, in part because they need that reliability to build that trust with their customers. But I think that there's also a real ability within that workforce to change, to adapt, and to develop new techniques and approaches, and to share those with customers. And one of the things that they need in order to do that is clarity and consistency from policy. So I mentioned the Green Homes Grant and the lack of sign up from tradespeople there. And the reason for that is because so many people undertook training and accreditation to become Green Deal installers, which the scheme then got cancelled. And so without that consistency, without that certainty, that undertaking training, paying for that training, taking time off work in order to train will actually deliver customers in the future and income, then a tradesperson will not undertake that process. So, you know, the Green Homes Grant is all well and good, but the government have said they're going to do this for, I think it's 3 years. I think they extended it slightly. It's not enough. You know, a tradesperson, in order to undertake that training and invest in that, they need to have a very clear time frame into the future, much more than 2 to 3 years, to say, okay, this is a growing area. This is an area that I can invest in for my business, and then undertake that work. And so I would look to something like Energy Efficient Scotland, the programme that is being developed by the Scottish Government at the moment. They've piloted the scheme for the last 3 years, and they're intending for that to run over the next 20 years. It's a national scale retrofitting programme. They've committed to it now. They're sharing those messages with supply chains now, and it will hopefully be running over the next 20 years. So I think that that kind of approach is one of the key things to overcome that conservatism.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you very much indeed. I'm not seeing anybody else desperately keen to come in. So I've got a very good question here from Joanne Wade, which will definitely go to not just Faye. I'm going to read this out in full. It says, given some of your key messages, as in UKERC's key messages this morning, the issue with relying on a tech solution in transport, electrification, the diversity of skills needed for building retrofit, the need for a just transition and citizen engagement. What's your reaction to the title of the Energy White Paper, Powering, underscored, Our Net Zero Future, with, at least according to Joanne, its connotations of electricity only, supply only, technology-centric solutions? So is it all a supply side electro-techno fix? Who'd like to take that one? Yeah, I thought you might. Keith.
Just to show that I'm here and listening, I think, and then Christian will come in, I'm sure, on the transport issues. But I would hope that it isn't actually kind of electricity only, supply only, exclusively technocentric. I mean, I haven't had a chance to look at the detail of what it's saying yet. It's going to be important to do that. I mean, it can't be kind of techno only when it's both saying we've got to decarbonize and we've got to make sure that bills to energy users are affordable. So that implies that you've got to have some kind of efficiency in the way things are used. And that in turn implies, I think, active participation in the kinds of community energy schemes that Faye was talking about, you know, kind of flexibility where you can get it in terms of the future energy system, and, you know, a proper joining together of, I think in particular, things like local energy planning and the provision of heat. You know, that's, again, you know, to deliver it. I mean, it does depend on technology, because you've got to be able to install a heat pump or potentially a hybrid heat pump with a hydrogen capable boiler. It does depend on technology because you need to get the low carbon electricity from somewhere. You've got to get low carbon hydrogen from somewhere. But it absolutely depends on engagement with people, because unlike the decarbonisation of the electricity system so far, which has really happened without really anybody noticing on the kind of demand side, this has got to engage energy users, and we've got to be kind of comfortable with the way in which it's being done. And that's a major challenge. But and again, hopefully Jason will be able to say something about this as well. You know, The Citizens Assembly does give some positive messages on that about the extent to which people could welcome it if they have the right kind of information. But there are all sorts of different ways in which people might receive that information, and nevertheless, there is going to be physical work needed for pretty much everybody's home, workplace, etc.
That's great. Thanks very much, Keith. I'm quite struck by the slide. There's a pie chart which the Committee on Climate Change presented in their sixth carbon budget report last week, which had there was a chunk, a fairly sizable chunk that was pure tech, according to them, and then I think there was about 16% that was pure behaviour change, like eating less meat or not flying. And then the rest, which was probably the majority of the slide, was a kind of combination of technology and behaviour change. Now, whether that's quite the right characterisation, I'm sure it's along the right lines, and it certainly chimes with what Keith was just saying. I suspect that quite a few panellists are going to want to come in on this one. I'm going to go to Christian next to take the challenge related to cars. Christian?
Yeah, no, Joanne. Oh, hang on. Internet connection is unstable. I hope people can hear me.
We can hear you.
Absolutely,
You're breaking up a little
Joanne.
bit,
I was given. Okay. Absolutely. I was sort of given 5 minutes to do some of the key points from the review, and even the review, I think, is sort of, although it's very important in our work, it sort of summarizes on usually a couple of key issues that come up with every year. And unfortunately, it's again this sort of having some sort of silver bullet in government policy in 2030, 2035, we phase out or substitute for tech, basically, is really not good enough. We need to do something in between. And as a hierarchy, I would certainly strongly support to, in transport, basically, avoid travel in the first place, right, if you don't have to do it. Some things around, destination shifting, shop more local, because transport is a derived demand, so you always have to look at the different journey purposes, whether it's commuting or shopping, etc., etc. Then shift to the most sustainable modes, and only then, if you have an EV, and this is the only way, or a car or whatever, travel somewhere, you should improve this. Now, this is hopefully then coming into the decarbonizing transport plan. That we have hope, because the consultation document published earlier this year really provided I hate this word, but it did provide some sort of paradigm shift in the way DFT, Department of Transport, we're thinking about this. So they were going down this route of really looking at travel demand first, and only then look at the tech solutions for meeting certain demand. So that was quite hopeful. That doesn't mean this has, propagated into other government departments, I think. But from our point of view, from UKERC point of view, as you know, we do a lot of research on travel demand as well, not just supply, but we just picked on those two issues for this review.
Very good. Jason, would you like to come in on this one?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Rob. Just to say that the chapter that I wrote in the Energy Policy Review was also co-authored by Tom Hargreaves, who I know is on the line here as well. Yeah, Joanne, great question there, and you're testing our speed reading skills on, because I was in a meeting just before this. I've very briefly glanced at the Energy White Paper, so I don't want to claim to be too authoritative on this, but I very much agree with your take on this in terms of the emphasis here being, through the title Powering Our Net Zero Future, on technological infrastructural changes, on economic changes, very much changes that are about doing things to people and society. If I was going to change the title, I would change it to Empowering Our Net Zero Energy Future. There's a flip side to what's going on here, which is about how society, how publics are going to be engaged in the longer term here. And this is a systemic problem that needs a systemic challenge, including on how we engage people. And there's no strategy. There's no strategy in the government's 10-point plan. There's no strategy in this white paper. Maybe there's a nod to it in the CCC's recent report, but there's no strategy on how the public are going to be engaged and people are going to participate in this. And that's what we need. And there needs to be a firm chapter on that. In this white paper that's just come out this morning, we see, interestingly, the first chapter's on consumers. And we see in that chapter, a reference to the Climate Assembly UK, which is great to see that government are actually acknowledging that this very important public engagement process has gone on, with a reference to dealing with issues of fairness. And there's an attempt to grapple with questions of fairness, fuel poverty, etc. But if those things are going to be dealt with, then there needs to be a much more comprehensive, strategic and joined up approach to engaging society. And Tom and I in our chapter give an outline on what that might look like. So I can come back to that if anyone would like more on that.
Okay, we've had a fair old run at this question. Caroline, did you want to come in on this one as well?
I just back to the question of the just transition, because for me, you know, in addition to what Jason talks about in terms of having a strategy around engagement, how do you engage? How do you get messages out? How do you reskill people in terms of how they think about their relationship to energy? All important things. The thing that I find missing from my speed reading this morning is any kind of engagement with the notion of the just transition. And if you compare that to what the EU have done when they've set out their green revolution that they're intending to go through, they have a very specific strategy now on just transitions, and it's at the center of what they're doing. Whereas if you look at what's happening in the UK by comparison, there doesn't seem to be any real in-depth engagement with that kind of notion yet. And it will be important if the UK phases out oil and gas over time. It will be important as also in terms of engaging citizens.
Okay, I'm gonna move us on. I think we should perhaps just be slightly mindful of where this particular white paper fits together with a whole bunch of other government commitments and kind of cross-departmental working. This is BEIS, and so this is the particular responsibilities that BEIS has, which excludes large swathes of things to do with wider transport policy and indeed a kind of wider, beyond the consumer. It's a very consumer-centric rather than citizen-centric view of the world, and I think that partly comes from where BEIS's responsibilities lie. Lots about smart and engagement with tariffs and so on, and much less about the wider citizen view that some of the colleagues here might have. I've got a few. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and wrap a few questions together. There's three. There's a question from Jack Edwards, also Ian Madley, and someone else who I've lost. Apologies. That's related to cars, Christian, and it's related to older vehicles and the kind of, you know, should we have a cut-off date where we have a scrappage? I mean, talks about ending second-hand sales, so a kind of scrappage scheme. Isn't it going to be hardest hitting the poorest rural dwellers? All of this stuff who perhaps don't have access to charging infrastructure and are particularly car dependent, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I answered a couple of questions, so that's where they disappeared into the answered section.
Oh, I don't think that works, I'm afraid. We just need to take it through. We haven't got a full-blown chat box going on.
Anyway, okay, so on the rural areas, absolutely. There's I mean, if you have a purchase tax on new cars, of course, that's different. This tax that we sort of tested here is sort of progressive in a way because it taxes the wealthy in a sense over the next 10 years. On used cars, this is, I mean, it's a very good question. This is one thing I want to look out for in the decarbonization transport plan, because rural areas are usually, even with EV infrastructure, with lots of other things, not just broadband and other stuff, basically forgotten. And if you target older polluting vehicles, that might be an issue there. One thing to note is that we've analyzed some of the MOT data over the years. So what are the trends? Where do older cars actually end up in this country? And quite often, they end up in Cornwall and Devon. So you have the sort of new cars appear quicker in London and other urban areas, and then end up in Cornwall. So this is sort of an interesting issue. And of course, that's where this question is very important. So I don't have an answer, to be honest, on this particular one, but I will be looking out for in the DFT's plans for this. On a date for, was it sort of like a end of sale of used cars by 2035? I probably would say 2040, sort of about 10 years after the new car sales ban. But that's, again, I haven't done any analysis of this, because that links to another question here on that list is, if we scrap all the old stuff now, what about the embedded emissions? And we looked at this a little bit. So if you do this too early, you're absolutely right. You might reduce your tailpipe emissions basically, but not your life cycle emissions. And if you do it too quickly, then where would your old cars all end up? There might be another market. I know this from within European countries. So most of the old German cars end up in Poland and then get passed on to Ukraine. So there's something about, I don't know, national emissions accounting there that's probably going under the radar a little bit.
All right, well, that's really interesting, Christian. I'm really fascinated by the internal UK demographics of car destinations, as well as those within near neighbours and across Europe. And I think it does very much. I mean, when we got the because we've got a bit of press coverage around this, and the questions when we went with the iPaper yesterday was very much. I think it does actually speak to what we're saying, that however, whether you have a cut-off date, whether you have a scrappage scheme, wherever these cars end up, the sooner you get started, the sooner you're going to be refreshing the vehicle fleet. And that's really the big message that I think is that what we want to do is with this recommendation or something similar is actually to get on with it rather than waiting until 2030, because there's going to be a legacy that you're otherwise going to have to tackle.
And that links back to demand side. And I came up, for example, I mean, you probably have to ask Gillian Annabel, my colleague here in UKERC, in the transport theme. She was part of the climate assemblies, and the big message coming out of there, if you do things early on the tech side, then you have a little bit more room on the demand side to avoid drastic action, which is basically, people not allowed or being priced out of using a car. A fossil fuel car later on. So there's a bit of a balance to be struck.
Okay, we've only got 8 minutes left. I'm going to take a couple of quite different questions now. So we've got one from John Broderick at the Royal Society of Chemistry, and John asks, is anyone able to comment on the implications of Brexit for battery manufacturing and the UK EV supply chain? Any thoughts on that? Christian, sounds like you seem to be on the hook for a lot of these. My apologies. Carolyn, have a go at your thoughts on that if you can as well, and anyone else that would like to come in. Christian,
sorry, I couldn't say anything that probably you would know anyway. So the Gigafactory by Tesla, there was a talk about this being placed in the UK, and of course because of Brexit it ended up being now being built near Berlin in Germany. So that's one downside of this. So I would say something has to be here, and you've probably read in the news, there's some excitement about lithium, one of the main ingredients of current battery technology, being mined in Cornwall. So coming back, we're always going back to Cornwall, seems to be. I think the company's called British Lithium, and they're basically exploring this, scaling this up right now for battery production within this country. In terms of the supply chain and Brexit, I really can't comment.
Okay.
So the only things I can talk about here are terms of trade type things. So there seem to be implications also in terms of trade. We don't quite know what the terms of trade for various goods will be, but there are fears that these sorts of parts that need to be coming into the UK to make various applications, technologies to do with renewable energy will have upward pressure on the costs of importing, obviously. Hence, you've seen the various announcements by car companies about relocating or not locating in the UK. The degree to which that then has an implication for batteries and where they should be innovated and developed, I think just remains to be seen. But just an overall message of an upward pressure, particularly if sterling continues to devalue, the implication of importing and exporting those kinds of goods with the EU. But that's just a very overall broad kind of comment.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions that are back to Faye, I think. One's from Kate Simpson, and there's a related question from Paul Eakins around energy efficiency skills in the built environment. So Kate says we're well done for including it, which obviously we thoroughly agree with. But what can we do about it? I think they're both asking, so how can researchers support addressing the skills gap? So what do we actually need to do, and what's the role for research?
Good questions. Thank you to Kate and Paul for those. What do we need to do in terms of research? I think that we need to, first of all, there's a lot more work to do to understand the breadth in terms of the role that tradespeople can play and construction professionals. So there is a growing body of work that looks at different groups in this area, but actually there's a huge diversity in terms of the types of work taking place. I know that we don't have much in terms of people fitting windows, people who are looking at solar panels and new technologies as well. So exactly who's doing that work and how that's taking place, I think there's a lot more insight to get there. And we also need to engage much more with the training side of things. And I mentioned as well the representative bodies. So one of the big challenges here, and I think it links to the question earlier around that conservatism, a big challenge is around the culture within this professional area, and how we try and shift that and how we bring messaging around energy efficiency into the mainstream here. So at the moment, it sits at the side in terms of vocational qualifications. It's an extra thing that somebody might choose to do, or it's taken on by an individual who is interested in that personally. It isn't something that is at the core of this professional space. And I think there's also a lack of consistency across built environment professionals. So they don't necessarily share that same aim to make sure that buildings are energy efficient and operating in a cost-effective way. So if we had a consistent kind of ethos amongst that group, I think that would really help as well to drive forward. So yeah, in terms of what researchers can do, I think look across that breadth, and I think engage with education and training in particular, and the representative bodies as well.
Okay, so we're running pretty short on time, and we're down now to our last 2 minutes. There's lots of questions that I'm afraid we're not just not going to get to. Good questions as well about how long these jobs that are being created are going to last for. Questions about what we need to do for low carbon heating, and I've just seen a message pop up that the meeting ending will be quite abrupt, so we will just cut off at 1 o'clock. So I think what I'll ask then is just if there's any quick final comments or reflections from any of my panelists. You can each have 10 seconds if there's anything that you'd like to put into the conversation. And I'm going to go roughly in what I can see as clockwise, which is probably not the same as others, but I can see Carolyn, have you got anything final to add?
Well, do you know, I just saw the question on interconnectors, and that's something that I could have put into the presentation on.
Then very quickly
on Brexit. Well, just to say that the economics of interconnection are now unclear because we don't know what the trading relationship is going to look like with the EU, which means that there are likely to be, well, there already have been some delays, but some interconnectors may or may not be built, depending on what the new economic looks like. So, sorry. That's me.
No, don't apologise. I think that interconnection plays such an important role in all of the modelling studies with high shares of renewables that I'm fairly sure that hasn't made its way into the consciousness of the ardent Brexiteers, but it's clearly an important issue. I've got another little message that says that we could run slightly over one. We won't get suddenly cut off. Faye, last comment from you, please, if you have one.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really pleased actually that there's been a lot of engagement around skills in the supply chain in this session. I think that it is really growing in terms of people recognising the importance of these groups, and I'm looking forward to engaging with that more and with policymakers as they come around to this idea too, slowly but surely.
Thanks, Faye. I should say that I'm sitting in a shed and the rain is getting louder and louder to the extent that I'm finding it more and more difficult to hear. So I'm just going to tell you now, I'm going to go in order, Keith, Jason and Christian. Any last remarks from you and then we'll wrap up. Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, I would just second what Faye said about education and skills. I think we need to get more data about really where the skills gaps are. And you know, there's a big role here, I think, for further education colleges in particular, and then to understand why individuals would go and seek new kinds of skills or not. And then again, it's the people bit, as we talked about earlier. You know, the next phase of the energy transition is going to affect people much more directly than what we've managed to do so far. But on the other hand, I'm really encouraged actually by a lot of what seems to have come out this morning. A lot of it does seem to be in the same direction as the CCC is recommending, for example. But as others have said in the Q&A and in this session, there's a lot of devil in the detail, and you know, that bit about engagement with people is really critical, I think.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Jason.
The fact that Keith is saying that this is absolutely crucial, and we see this echoed, that societal engagement, public engagement is going to be crucial moving forward. I think this is a shift, right? Over the last 10 years, we've seen a shift. Now societal engagement is being taken seriously. But we actually, like I say, we need a plan for public engagement, societal engagement, and also, as Caroline says, around just transition as well. And that needs to be as much an emphasis as the technological and economic dimensions. And this needs a kind of joined up approach as well. We need to move beyond just, say, one-off approaches to thinking about how society is engaging through citizens' assemblies, through behaviour change programmes, you know, through community energy initiatives, etc., etc., etc. These things are currently going on a one-off basis, and we need to look at this systemically and think about how this can work kind of better together.
Okay, thanks very much. Christian.
And from my point of view, well, it's sort of act now to avoid pain later. That's probably the key message from my point of view in transport. So across demand and supply, we focused on supply here today, but you're definitely on the demand side as well. And because, I mean, essentially the numbers don't add up. So we also need some more clarity from government, because the government so far has left it to manufacturers and industry and consumers. You know, that's what was clearly stated in the Road to Zero strategy of the DFT. Then we really need to probably drive their own agenda a little bit further, and we are looking forward to the plan they're going to publish hopefully early next year.
Okay, so we're over time. I'd just like to thank all of the participants. I'd like to thank everyone. I think there's over 100 people on the participating. Thank you all of my panelists. I'd also like to thank Jessica Bays in particular for her hard work in pulling the review together. No mean feat, but obviously the rest of the UKERC team for their hard work as well. It's available for download from the UKERC website. I'd love to tell you where, but I don't know, but I'm sure that we can send round the link for you to access the review. We will be continuing to engage. Bays have launched some consultations alongside the white paper. We've already been running some workshops with colleagues focused on aspects of the white paper. There's some very important research questions around all of this that UKERC will be continuing to take forward. And of course, there's scrutiny of all of this from the BEI Select Committee and the National Audit Office, and all of those other the good offices of all of those other organisations, and we'll be engaging with all of that too. So thanks again to everybody for participating. I have been sent the URL, but I'm not going to try and read that out. But we put that into the chat, and I wish you all a very jolly, careful Christmas, whatever it is that he said. Have a great Christmas. Thanks again for all your contributions, and bye bye.
Thank you.